Welcome, everybody, to Broadcast Team Alpha, where we bring you cutting edge conversation while exploring the quantum possibilities. And I can't help but giggle a little bit when I say that tonight because we are just so doing it again. And we're doing it with a special person in a special way. And I just want to talk to the people who are new to this information. It's hard to know what to believe. It's hard to know where to cast your focus because there's so much stimuli out there. But I have to tell you, our guest is such an incredible soul and such an incredible person who is so deeply studied and researched that I really invite you from my heart of hearts tonight that if you ever lend an ear to new information that might make you bristle at first, maybe just take a breath and relax into it, and then later decide what you really think about it, because there is incredible information coming out tonight. And, you know, Paul has been known as the paleo guy. I can't even call him a guy because I have so much respect for him in the past. But, we're going into the future and it's so exciting. But before we get started, I want to thank you for being here. Thank you for suspending your disbelief, even just for the next 49 minutes. Thank you for your super chats and supporting us. And I'm not really going to say much more of anything except, Augie, please introduce our esteemed guest.
Yes, thank you very much. This is going to be so wonderful. I've been looking forward to this for since 2 months ago when we booked the show. I I want to welcome Paul Anthony Wallis to the show. And for those of you that like to surf the internet at the same time you're listening and watching things, I'll give you his website. It is paulanthonywallis.com. And he's such a phenomenal guest, a world traveler, a researcher, and a digger into old records that hardly anybody ever gets to see. He's also an international bestseller and an author. And his books probe into the ancient human history and now a different form of present history. Now, that's a new term to some people, but we're going to look into that. And we are looking into mythologies and human history, and we're finding that a lot of the mythologies that we have heard of, they are coming true. And also, there's so much more on his bio. I want to leave that to the show to unvolve itself. And I gotta admit it, I've been spying on Paul a little bit. I've been looking on YouTube, and I'm finding a show there that speaks of, actually, the title of the show is Was Jesus an Alien? Well, I want to ask him that question, but I don't want the answer now. I want to wait until later in the show where it would fit in, because I also want him to think about that and remember everything in regard to that, because I think the show dates back a little bit. Another question is that he has probably researched the Sumerian tablets even more than I have. And in there's some incredible things. And one of them is that the people that claim to have created us, the Anunnaki, may be on their way back because they think they own this planet. And I'm wondering, do you think they'll be happy with what we have done to their property when they come back? I want to ask him that too, but I don't want the answer now either. I want to wait till the end of the show because this one is deep. And yes, there is something to this. So, gosh, welcome to the show, Paul.
Welcome,
Hey,
Paul.
Augie. G'day, Nora. It's great to be with you again.
So good to be with you, Paul. You have been incredibly busy. And as I alluded to in the beginning, we've been looking at a lot of paleo history with your previous books. And I know I think you were thinking of taking a break before this book came and captured you. So tell us how that happened, and tell us how you shifted gears for this incredible book.
Well, you're absolutely right, Nori. I was planning a break after the fourth book in the Eden series, which was the Eden Conspiracy.
Yeah.
That had been the longest book in the series to that point, and it looks at how the Bible itself records the process by which ancient Judaism changed from a canon of paleo contact to a canon of monotheistic religion. And it identifies the scribes and the kings and the high priests who made that change, who changed the narrative. And so, after doing all the research for that and launching that book, I thought I'll take a breath. People have got four of my books to be getting on with. But then I couldn't take a break because so much happened over the last 18 months or so that speaks to the question of contact in the present. And I started receiving such a volume of correspondence from people saying, "You've been studying ancestral narratives, ancient texts. How do they speak to what's happening now? Do they give us a way of interpreting what's happening? There's this stoush going on between the Pentagon and elements of the US Congress surrounding the secrecy around present ET contact. Can you speak to this? Do you have any light to shed on this?" And of course, from the research I'd already done, I knew that ancestral narrative speaks directly to those questions and gives us the opportunity to listen to what's being spoken, to have some idea how to filter it, how to interpret it, and what to do about it. Anyone who listened to the hearing that happened on July the 26th of last year, the House Oversight Subcommittee hearing with the three witnesses, David Grush, Ryan Graves,
Yep.
David Fravor, would be thinking, what is going on here? Can I believe this? What do I make of the witnesses? Can I trust them? Why has this been allowed to happen? Taken at face value, it's a greater act of disclosure than we've seen in more than 70 years. And what do I do with that information? In the hearing itself, we heard from Andy Ogles and Tim Burchett, two congressmen who were asking the question, is present contact something we should be worried about? Is there an existential threat hanging over the national security of the United States of America, and by inference, the world? Because if there is, they were saying, that's all our business. That information isn't the private property of some unit within the military intelligence community. That's the business of Congress. And this was the argument they were having. So it suddenly became very urgent, and all of a sudden there was information coming to us by way of semi official disclosure statements. And I'll tell you what I mean by that.
Mhm.
The witnesses in their conversation in that hearing and in other interviews spoke about entire craft of belonging to our visitors, which are now in the possession of the military intelligence community. Other artifacts, what they are, where they were retrieved, when they were retrieved, the names of the people who've run the reverse engineering program for the Pentagon for more than 70 years, and the names of the Pentagon officials who blocked disclosure. Now, we didn't hear the details of that, but the fact that that information exists was spoken in that hearing and in other interviews. And the reason I say that's a semi official disclosure is that none of that could be spoken without clearances from DOPSA, that's the Department of Defense Office for
Yeah.
Pre Publication Service Review, and ISIG, that's Thomas Monheim, the Inspector General of the Intelligence Community. Everything we've heard, the speakers had to have permission to speak. And so we know that Thomas Monheim and DOPSA are happy for those things to be spoken in public. That's a massive step forward. And so, with all that information suddenly in the public domain, I knew I had to engage, and engage I did, and it's produced the book, The Invasion of Eden.
That is so um, credible. It makes the witnesses so much more credible. When I heard you say Dopsa and Icy, and I really thought into what that might look like, that conversation. And yes, you can say this and not say that. But what they did say, exactly what you said, is that information has been spoken. It's out there. And we're talking 70 years that this
Yes.
has been, or more, right? Or more, that this has been withheld from us.
And that
Mm.
clearance makes the boundary of what they said very interesting. So when David Grush talks about entire craft and their pilots, well, the obvious next question is pilots. So are they alive? Are we in communication? And to that question, David Grush says, I can't answer that in public. That would have to be in a SCIF, a secure compartmented information facility. Now, the only reason there would be a boundary around that is if the answer to that question is very interesting and somewhat controversial. So you can infer what the answers are every time the witnesses say, I can't answer that publicly. So it's what was said and what wasn't said that
Yeah.
really ought to catch our attention.
Yes. Yes. Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
And I go ahead, Augie. I'm so sorry.
yeah. And the thing about when he got asked something that he couldn't talk about by giving an answer to the question, that means when he said that has to be done in executive session, that means that the answer exists.
Yes.
There is an answer. And if it wasn't, he could say, I don't know about that, or it doesn't exist. But he
Yes.
said, I have to talk to that in executive session. So there is something there. He
That's
proved
right.
that the answer exists.
That's right.
And
It says
that's
there's
good to me.
something to see here.
Yep.
Something to see here. I love that. And and I love how you said that you are helping to prime the people for what is in the pipeline. And I'm a very visual person, and I can only imagine, like, the density of what is in the pipeline, because we're talking 70 years now, and maybe there's more. So whatever's in that pipeline has got to be so deep, so expansive, so maybe unfathomable to many people. Yeah.
I think that's right. The Pentagon appears to be in a two-step dance of disclosure at the moment.
Hmm. Hmm.
And when I say the Pentagon, it's worth clarifying the Pentagon is a community of people and it doesn't speak with one voice. And not everyone in the Pentagon thinks the same thing. So while the people who populate Dopsa and Thomas Monheim might be in a forward leaning position in terms of what they feel should be in the public domain, there are others who hold a very different opinion. And so, following the hearing on July 26th, we heard from Sean Kirkpatrick, who at that time was the chief of ARROW, that's the All Domain Anomaly Resolution
Yeah.
Office, say, well, this whole hearing was just an insult to the integrity of the people in my unit, and we haven't found any evidence for a program or ET contact. That didn't go down very well. And so shortly afterwards, he was moved on and replaced by the Deputy Secretary of Defense, Kathleen Hicks. And that handover of the baton was all done in the language of transparency. We applaud Sean Kirkpatrick for his commitment to transparency. I will continue that legacy. We will be transparent with Congress and the American people, which I had to raise an eyebrow when I heard that, because the idea that secret services are going to be committed to transparency, I mean, that's a non-starter. But why did I say all that? Because the Pentagon is a community of people, and yet there is this pattern we can observe over the last 7 years that is a two-step dance of disclosure. And what I mean by that is there's a leak.
Hmm.
2017, the leak was of the footage of the USS Nimitz engagement with a tic tac shaped craft. And we now know it was leaked by Chris Mellon. the former Assistant Secretary of Defense for Presidents Clinton and George W. Bush. And he's still a free man walking around, despite presumably having broken non-disclosure agreements and official secrets laws. So we can gauge by the fact he's not been arrested. This was permitted. So a semi-official leak. And then the Pentagon observed the public reaction. And there's no blind panic like we're seeing in the three-body problem. And so 2 years later, there's another semi-official statement, or a number of them made, to affirm what's gone before. And in a way, the Pentagon has stepped forward in 2019 and said, yes, we authenticate that footage. That's for real. And we've had units in place for more than 70 years investigating materials retrieved from UAPs and UFOs. So it authenticates what's gone before and then takes a step forward. And then in 2021, we had the Senate briefing paper, 9 flimsy pages, didn't seem to have much in it, except when you read it slowly enough, you realized it was saying that Department of Defense activity is interfered with, on average, once every 6 weeks by mass sightings. So that's quite a high incidence of contact going on right there. And then we had congressional conversations, then 2023, the congressional hearing, all this information is out there. So if we continue on the same pattern, I would say that by 2026, we will be hearing the next batch of disclosures, whether it's from so-called whistleblowers or if it's more official than that. But something will be coming in or before 2026, and people need to be ready for it. Some people are, those who are following the stories, but mainstream media hasn't shone a lot of light on this. And certainly around the world, I find there's a huge taboo still, certainly in the world of communities of faith, to even discuss the possibility of ET contact. And I hope that my books are sort of pushing the conversation forward a bit.
Yeah, I'm wondering too. Do you think there is a major plan behind it all? Because it seems to me like we're being spoon fed, and the spoon is rather small. So we're getting we're getting stuff, more and more of it. But we are going through a tunnel here towards something in the future. Could that be the fake alien invasion that has been talked about by Werner von Braun, the head of NASA, and others, other government officials, and so on over there?
Well,
Do you?
personally, I believe that in order for a fake alien invasion to be credible in the mind of the public, we're going to need a whole lot more spoon feeding than we've had so far. And you're right, it's only a very small spoon that's being used. So if that were ever to be done, I really feel that's a long way off because the groundwork just hasn't been done for it. But if I go to Hayam Ashed, he was the brigadier general who for 28 years was the chief of Israel's space security program. He gives us an idea of what we're moving towards in terms of disclosure. He says, yes, we have been in contact for more than 70 years. So, specifically, that's the presidential administration of Harry Truman. And that since that time, we've been in collaboration with at least one group of our visitors. And that collaboration is to do with their research in and around planet Earth, whatever that might be, but also around our own technological progress. And he says that our visitors slash overseers are waiting for us to become a spacefaring civilization. And once we are, we're in the club. As soon as we have access to the cosmos, everything changes. We go from being the studied, the observed, the abducted, to being members of the community of spacefaring civilizations. Hayam Ashed says, and that's echoing language spoken by Ed Mitchell, the sixth man to walk on the moon. He believed that's what we're aiming for. That's the big change. And Hayam Ashed has said that our visitors have chosen not to self-disclose until we're in that place. And the collaborations may also be around what we call the program. Now, the program is our attempt to reverse engineer the materials that give our visitors interstellar capacity. And it's as if we've been handed some artifacts and been told, see if you can make that. And when we listen to the scientists currently working on the program, so that includes French physicist Jacques Vallée, American physicist Eric W. Davis, and American microbiologist, that's an interesting point,
Mhm.
Gary Nolan, Nobel Prize nominee, when they talk about their work on the program, they say that they have exotic materials that were engineered off planet, outside of our atmosphere. These are isotopes that don't exist within our atmosphere. These are materials engineered at an atomic level, and that we want to know how to make these because they appear to create a little anomaly in space time, a little space time bubble. So we know that it's the fabric from which the visiting craft are made that allows them to ping through space through an artificial wormhole. And evidently, our observers are just waiting for us to master that technology. And once we do that, and once that's public, that's when they are going to consider themselves free to self disclose so that everybody can know we are in contact and have been for a very long time. And I think even at that point, by the time we reach that, more spoon feeding would have happened. And the fact that this has been a stable arrangement for more than 70 years, that itself speaks to the fact that we're not on the brink of some catastrophe. I think we're on the brink of a great leap forward.
I
That's
agree.
wonderful. So, when you talk about being spacefarers, um, unlike a lot of the dialogue that happens in the spiritual community, they're not really waiting for us to raise our vibration as much as they're waiting for us to be fully indoctrinated with the information, or am I going in the right
Yes,
direction?
I think habituated to the idea of contact and then technologically able. I mean, it would be nice to think that they're waiting for us all to learn world peace before the
Yes,
next major thing happens. But
yes.
that isn't something I've picked up from my research. It's not something I hear in ancestral story, and it's not a note I pick up from witnesses involved in things like the program. I think a great
Mm,
deal will change because there's a lot of conflict built into our geopolitics around, for instance, energy. And the moment we reach the bar of space-faring technology, we've also reached the bar of free energy. So all the manipulations of warfare and scarcity, inflation, cost of living crises that are built into the power industry and the oil industry, all that falls away. It's totally unnecessary because we will have and do have behind closed doors access to free energy. So I think we have to remember that a lot of the conflicts in the world today are are engineered by a certain tier of society, and a lot of their purchase comes from the economic structure of our society, and that is built around scarcity. It's built around banking and oil and energy, and
Yeah.
all that is about to change.
yes. Wow,
Mhm.
this is huge. How do you perceive this rollout, so to speak? Do you perceive it as fast moving, or because I mean, I have nothing to compare it to.
Yeah.
I'm like traveling new ground here with this. So,
Well, I would say the last 7 years has been super fast.
mhm.
Yeah.
Since that leaking of the Nimitz footage, it's been super fast compared with what I've seen in my own lifetime. From the year 2000, things began to speed up because that was really the beginning of a serious declassification movement. And
Mm,
many of the people who spearheaded that movement, that's declassification um, of defense and government files concerning UFO sightings. That movement was spearheaded by people who previously had been employed by governments and military to suppress information about UFO sightings. Their jobs had been to collate reports and then classify the experiences that couldn't be explained away and publicize the ones that could be debunked. So the official policy was silence and debunking. That changed around 2000. So that was a shift. And prior to that, people were being quietly gotten rid of who were giving
Yeah.
away too much information about current contact. So that's a big shift we've seen in the last quarter century. So I would say things are speeding up.
Mm. And it's so incredible to me because the program, right, the R&D program, um, they know the location, they know the materials. I mean, they know the what, the when, the how, and that is just so massive to me, you know?
It is. And I want to come back to the how, Nori, because it relates to your question about raising our vibration, our level of consciousness, because there is an overlap between our visitors' technology and mind or consciousness. If you listen to the report of Department of Defense personnel, pilots who have been deployed to try and engage with these visiting craft, they say things like this: these tic tacs moved more like they were animals than craft being piloted, as if you couldn't get a piece of paper between the mind and intention of the pilot and the movement of the craft. And so, even by observation, they have been um, guessing that there is some way of connecting the pilot with the craft that has to do with connecting the mind or the consciousness of the pilot. And so when David Grush talks about non-human biologics as something separate and distinct from pilots, he could be referring to the craft themselves, and maybe are becoming spacefarers has to do not just with nuts and bolts technology, but how we are able to operate the technology with our minds. And script writers are already running with that idea. If you watch Star Trek Discovery, that craft has what's called the spore drive,
Mm.
where you kind of have to plug the pilot into the ship in order for the ship to work. And it's quite interesting because it's kind of a flip of everyone's concern about AI, where they think the danger is we might be machinized. But in this picture, it's actually the other way around, that our technology has become more organic so that we can interface with it and get it to do what we want it to do. And that seems to be the ball game we're playing with these exotic materials.
Mhm.
Incredible. So the consciousness could actually be piloting, for lack of a better word, the craft.
Yep.
That's right.
Mm. And I want to say something here now. For those of you that joined us late, we are talking with Paul Anthony Wallis, and we have been discussing the many thoughts and concepts behind what's coming. And we know it's coming, a form of disclosure. But also, I want to mention his last book. He's written 5 books, and the last one is The Invasion of Eden. Well, chances are that Earth was invaded 450,000 years ago, or maybe claimed, because there may not be much going on in that area where they came. But where did what happened back then? How did we get here? And the Anunnaki that came, from what I see in the Sumerian tablets, they think they own this place. What do you
Yes, that's
think?
right. That's absolutely right. You certainly picked that up in the Enuma Elish, where
Yeah.
the sky people arrive, the Anuna, the Anunnaki, and once they've arrived, as far as they're concerned, this is their planet. And the flora and fauna, that's their flora and fauna. The ecological environment, that's theirs. it begins, I believe, with references to terraforming a devastated planet. So hats off to them for that. Thank you for that. So the separation of waters, salt water from fresh water, the separation of land from water, that's there. It's there in Genesis. It's there in Nigerian story. It's there in Filipino story. It's there in the Mayan story, the Popol Vuh. Flooded world then gets rehabilitated. So hats off to them for that. And then they engineer human beings, and not only human beings, but primates as well.
Yeah.
So the story suggests interventions in evolution on planet Earth that predate Homo sapiens. But at some point, they say we need something like a Homo sapiens to do the work for us and bring us our food. That's the phrase used in the Popol Vuh. And so they own the land, they own the people. In the Bible, you can go to Psalm 32, Psalm 82, and Deuteronomy 32, and read about the point at which the Seva Hashemayim, the sky armies, are dividing the lands among themselves. And so the Elohim in the biblical narratives get the lands. You can hear that in Norse story. Odin has his base somewhere in ancient Armenia and then moves from there with his advanced friends and neighbors into Northern Europe, and they carve the land up with total ease, giving Saxony to one of his sons and Norway to one of his sons, so on and so forth. So yes, they act as if they own the place, and that is reflected in the Sumerian story, African, Mesoamerican, Indian, all around the world. That's the motif of the stories of beginnings.
Yeah. And they're coming back, aren't they?
Well, I think who we're in company with now, we have far more contact now than we had back then.
Yeah.
I think the Anunnaki had it easy. They got Earth as a staging post in this region of space. That was Enlil's concern, and he wasn't very concerned in Earth beyond that point, that we've got control of it. This is our staging post in this part of the galaxy. And they didn't seem to have to fight off a lot of other factions. They seem to fight among themselves. There are wars in heaven, but I would suggest that there are far more demographics present now who feel they have a stakeholding in Project Earth than in the deep past and in the story suggested in the deep past.
Yeah.
There's quite a spectrum of contact that we read about in the past. We've got Anunnaki arrivals that do sound like invasions, but then we've got other arrivals, entities like Dagon or Asherah or Hathor, who have arrived to support human progress. Many of our ancestral stories about visitors from the Pleiades, for instance, or from Sirius, are about tutors coming and teaching our ancestors how to be more intelligent, how to use their imaginations, how to become farmers, how to build
Yeah.
cities, how to become a civilization. And I think the stories of support and the correlations with human progress actually outweigh the stories of invasion, but it is a great spectrum of experiences.
Mm. Yeah, I remember reading in 1989. There were 3 articles in 3 different newspapers. Chicago Tribune was one of them. San Francisco Chronicle, I think it was one of them, where they said that scientists has or astronomers has discovered a huge object at the edge of the solar system, and they didn't know what it was. And it was there. I still have one of the articles. And then everything went black. Nobody talked about it anymore. There is something out there on its way in. Do you think that could be the Planet X or Nibiru or?
Yes, I talk about Nibiru. In my reading of the stories that come from the Mesopotamian cuneiforms, I have not concluded that Nibiru is necessarily a planet. Now, I know that's what Zechariah Sitchin argued for, But the function of Nibiru in the Mesopotamian stories is as a star base, as a space station. That's its function. And so that much I am confident of. I
Hmm.
find that coherent. It matches the stories of the Bible and the stories of the Vedas. So it's certainly that. However, there are objects out there that we have not studied publicly that I think have a bearing on the shape and functioning of our solar system. There may be artificial objects. There may also be planets or dead stars that are influencing our solar system that have it on a slant, that distort it as it comes closer on its orbit. And that's something I would really like to probe a little further. It's something my friend Matthew LaCroix has been studying, and he believes that actually there is a second star nearby that we don't know, a dead star, a dark star that has an impact on a cyclical basis with our entire solar system. So that's as much as I know to this point. I'll put some more study time into that and see what I find out. But certainly, there are anomalies in our solar system the way it is that suggests interference by other objects.
Hmm. Yeah, and that Nibiru just might be a that star you just mentioned also, because there may be planets. I mean, if it is a dwarf star, then there could be planets around it. And when they come through, remember they talk about all kinds of mischief happen when these things come through. You know, you have a lot of asteroids and stuff happening. And
Well, Plato, of whom I'm a great fan, the Greek philosopher who's writing 2.5 millennia ago, he believed that life on Earth is impacted in a major way every 5,000 years or so,
yeah,
and that civilization is taken back to a virtual zero. There has to be a reboot. And he posited that this might be due to the movement of objects through space. And
mhm,
he doesn't define what they are. He doesn't say, oh, it's a dead star, it's a moon, it's something artificial, it's an asteroid. But he did relate these extinction level events to objects in space. And I
yeah,
find that very interesting. I think his understanding of space was far more developed than people have often realized. He knew about deep space, he knew about the movement of objects in space, he knew what our planet looked like from a distance viewed from space.
mhm,
And once you read that in him, put the date on it, 2,500 years ago, you have to ask, how did he know that? Because you and I didn't know what planet Earth looked like from a distance until 1968, when Apollo 8 took its now famous photograph of the planet looking back
yeah,
from space. And all of a sudden we realized, oh, our planet doesn't look like a map that's been stretched around a sphere. It looks
yeah.
like a marble, a swirl of colors, a swirl of white
Mhm.
and blue and gold, which is exactly how Plato described it. How did he know?
From the old writings that you have studied, there are predictions hidden in it, and some of them are out wide in the open. Do you see any of those predictions written about in the past that will affect our future that you can mention? Maybe would be important to us to know about.
No, not specific predictions, not in the text I've been studying. The texts I've been studying have been far more to do with helping the reader in future generations, future cultures, to understand
Mhm.
what's going on right now, to
Yeah,
understand why the world is the way it is right now, to understand, for instance, the concept of covert government. And I talk about this in the Eden Conspiracy, to understand about the persistence of
yeah,
old powers, where you think you've gotten rid of a king, but you still got crown power running the show for another 800 years. The idea that you can't understand the politics of war until you realize there is a non-human layer to the governance of Project Earth, and that there are decisions that are made that have no compassion towards ordinary human beings built into them because they were made at a non-human level. And so it's more lessons to do with the present that I've found when I've listened to indigenous story and ancient texts.
Mhm. I think also, though, in those things that you write about in the past is based on history. History always repeats itself, so we can expect some of the same thing happen in the future. And it's up to us to determine how far in the future or how near in the future are those things expected to happen that you talk about in the past.
Yes, that's quite right. And that's one of the taglines of the book is history repeating itself in the 21st century. And a great example of that is the story of the invasion of the Mo'o, which is a story that comes from ancient Hawaii. This is a thread that goes all the way through the invasion of Eden. And I talk about the history of Hawaii, which is a story of a history of conquests, a history of invasions, and we can think about the American invasion, which was really conducted by businessmen who enlisted the support of the American Navy
Yeah,
to invade and take over Hawaii and force the Queen to Liliuokalani to sign her nation over to them. And they hoped that people would believe that she'd done this voluntarily. And that was the story that was told until 1993, I think it was, when her diaries resurfaced and all the detail of that awful coup came to light. And so what happens there is the USA turns up and cancels all the traditional ownership of land. It now belongs to this um, cadre of businessmen headed up by the Dole family, and they will now make the laws and call the shots. We're seeing a repeat of that right now as another layer of traditional ownership is being abrogated by new laws that basically says you can sell land that belongs to somebody else because we've created a new system of deeds, so on and so forth.
yeah,
There's also a really eerie repeat of the invasion of the Mo'o because after the fires on Maui, developers moved in so quickly. 2 days after you've lost your ancestral property, there's someone on the phone saying, I represent a very wealthy American billionaire who'd like to expand his holdings on the island. This is the price we're offering you for your land. And suddenly, fires become the signal for a land grab. And
yeah,
that's the story of the Mo'o. These draconic beings arrived in the deep past and they created fires and they grabbed the land. They cancelled all traditional ownership of it. The land was now theirs. And then, after the fashion of Deuteronomy 32, they carve the land up and give it to themselves. So the people have suddenly gone from being free to being someone else's tenants. They're now
yeah,
on somebody else's land. They have to pay just to live on the land. And the owners of the land, of course, then can control what you do with it. Do you have a license to farm? Do you have a license to sell those fruit? And so the
yeah,
country's been taken over, and the people now have to work for the conquerors and for the tokens the conquerors are giving. So it goes over to a money system. And that story parallels the story of Oannes and the Apkallu, who arrive and teach the ancestors of the Sumerians to build a city and run a city. And it's all done on a money basis so that the people are moved off the land into a city. They're now tenants, they're now working for money, they're given money, the money is devalued. They then have to pay the money back in taxes, so on and so forth. So it really is a form of control. Now, those stories I believe, are about the past experiences of colonization,
yeah,
but they are also about understanding more recent history. When we see land enclosure acts in Britain from the 1500s to the 1800s, to realize it's the same thing. When we see the privatization of money, to realize it's the same thing. When we see policies in the present day in Australia that are really aimed at urbanizing the population, moving us off the land, moving us away from self-sufficiency, to realize it's the same thing. And
Yeah.
it's all to do with the management and control of the human population.
Mm.
That's a lot to think about. But something, I just want
Yeah.
to shift gears, if I may, just a little. So we're having this conversation with the off-planet beings. Who are they having conversations with? Is that conversation only being held with certain military groups, or people with certain security clearances? And how do we get more information?
Yes,
Clean information, not
yes.
picked over.
That's a great question, Nori, because everything I was just talking about suggests conversations at a covert government level, because these Uber policies have obviously proceeded from conversations at that level. And I think that conversations behind closed doors are the ones that began in the 1940s under President Truman. Now, if all our contact with our visitors were on that footing, I would be concerned. If I thought that beings had come to our planet, traveling interstellar distances to affect the human future, and they were only talking to the members of the deep state and corporate types who are involved in the program, I would be worried, because their interests and the interests of the 99% might be quite different.
Mhm.
However, on my journey into paleo contact, and as I've researched particularly the book Echoes of Eden in my series, I've realized that contact is going on at every level of human society. It's
Yeah.
not just behind closed doors, it's not just with the higher ups in the deep state. People at every level of society, all around the world, are having contact experiences and getting information from those experiences. So I think when our visitors are doing research, they are actually being a little bit more finessed and intelligent than we might fear. I think they are talking to ordinary people about our experiences of life, learning what we are like, understanding what the human experience really is. And I've come to have far more respect for the experiences of individuals who say, I have contact either with beings I can see, or I'm getting information. I'm not quite sure where it's coming from, but it's really coherent. And I'm
Mm.
building up a picture. And as I've listened to more and more people having those experiences, and then as I find, for instance, in 1 John 4 in the New Testament, that the early Christians fully expected these kinds of experiences, it reassures me that contact is far, far deeper and wider, and that our visitors' understanding of who we are and what is good for humanity is far more finessed.
Mm. Do you think we were somewhat um, obtusely prepared? Only because we never really looked at it. Do you think we've been prepared somehow for this moment, this very moment in time?
We have been prepared, the preparation is there, but it's at the folkloric layer. So we're not being prepared at school. We're not being
Mm.
prepared by the TV. We're not being prepared by government. But the moment you start listening to ancestral stories,
Mhm.
folklore around the world, that's where the preparation is. That's where the information is about how our ancestors experienced, coped with, handled, and thrived in a world of contact.
Coped with and thrived. I love that, Paul.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And
Amazing.
I think also that the extraterrestrial presence also are in contact with heads of state and people of influence, because
Yes.
there was a letter that surfaced from back in 1880, no, 1872 or something like that. One of the guards in the White House that stood outside of the They had a guard outside of the Oval Office after he got that, and he's heard President Lincoln talking in there, and he said there were no one in the office. So he opened the door and stuck his head in, and Abraham Lincoln was standing in the middle of the room talking. So when he heard the door came open, he turned around and he said, "Don't worry." He says, "I have a visitor." And so the guard closed the door. But there was nobody in the room except Abraham Lincoln. So they do make contacts.
Yes, yes, they do. We heard in 2008 from Dmitry Medvedev, who was then the Russian prime minister, that every new prime minister of Russia is given the dossier detailing the civilizations with whom we're already in contact. And it would not surprise me to hear that that goes back as far as Abraham Lincoln, because it certainly goes back as far as the ancient kings and queens that we read about in traditions around the world. And the idea, in fact, that the right to rule of kings and queens is derived from contact with cosmic beings. That's
Yeah,
built into the ceremony, for instance, of the Jaguar dynasty. Um, and it's built into, I mean, even into the coronation of King Charles III of
yeah,
Great Britain, of the United Kingdom. When he was crowned, he had to be crowned above the stone of Scone. And that stone has a long history that goes
yeah.
all the way back to Jacob and the standing stones he erected when he had contact with cosmic beings. And so there's a little message built into that stone's journey into the throne over which King Charles was crowned. And that is that his authority to rule is derived from the authority of cosmic beings and contact with cosmic beings. It was not talked about in the coronation, but the presence of the stone itself, that is its story. So I think as it goes way back, I think heads of state know more, but they don't necessarily know everything that their secret services know.
Yeah.
Who do you
Boy, oh
think
boy.
who do you think knows the most, Paul? Is it that small population of people, or who do you think really, really knows?
Well, I I think first of all, I'd probably want to spend some time at the feet of the elders of traditional cultures because I think they give me a big picture and a wide
Yeah.
picture and a deep picture. If I could sit down with Hayam Ashed, I would sit down with him because he's now at an age where he's unafraid to be honest and
Mm,
talk about the things he knows. And he's certainly in a position to know a lot about current exopolitics. He's now, I think, 92.
mm,
Um, so I would love
mm,
to spend time with him. And I think him alongside some ancestral leaders, I'd have a pretty good idea of what's going on.
mm.
But
Thank you for answering that.
the other people who won't get into conversation with me because I think they really are bound by official secrets laws are the leaders of the units within the aerospace industry who are working on the program because I do believe that collaboration involves contact. So if I just found the right people within Boeing and Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, and Skunk Works, I
Yeah,
might get some more technical information from them.
right.
Hmm. Gosh, I
Fascinating.
see we only have 5 minutes left of the show. And could you talk a little bit about your last book and also the other? You have five out there, and I only have read one. Escaping from Eden is the only one I got to read so far, so I better get with it. But talk about your books because you have so much in there that people need to know.
Well, Escaping from Eden is the book where I show that if you go to the root meanings of keywords in the Bible, you will start the stories that emerge will be the Sumerian stories. They are the summary
Mm,
form of the Sumerian stories of contact with sky people. and that many of the stories we think of as God's stories are really recollections of contact in the deep past. And then the scars of Eden ask the question, well, what difference does that make? What difference does it make if we were created by God in one hit, or if we've been tweaked by ET visitors? And I look at the political and the psychological consequences of what that contact was. Echoes of Eden is where I sit at the feet of indigenous leaders and listen to the folklore and realize that the story of contact has been alive as long as humanity has been here, but it's been suppressed by
Yeah.
official voices, and yet it survives from age to age. The Eden Conspiracy is where I show how the story of paleo contact was deliberately suppressed in the 6th century BCE, leading to the policies of silence and taboo that we know today. And then the invasion of Eden is looking at what's happening right now and how do we interpret it.
Yeah. Oh, my last question was Jesus an alien? What do you think?
Well, I think Christians have often read the Bible in a bubble, and some Christians boast the Bible is the only book they read. If it's the only book they read, they will miss the fact that the nativity story of Jesus is not unique. First of all, it parallels the nativity of John the Baptist. It is modeled on the nativity of Isaac, the son of Abraham and Sarah, and that story is a close encounter story. All three are.
Yeah.
But you can go to China and hear identical stories told about the Yellow Emperor, the Pasi Buddha, um, the founder of Taoism, Lao Tzu. They all have stories of anomalous encounters that have created anomalous conceptions and the arrival of people who are unusually conscious, intelligent, and who have pushed the human experience forward in some amazing way. So that's really the context of my video, was Jesus an alien? A lot of people take offense just at the title, but get into the video and you realize that's the territory we're exploring. And I think it gives more credibility to the recollections of the gospel, but allows us to understand it on a more cosmic footing.
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
Yeah. And then what if there was an abduction of his mom and she was impregnated by an alien, so he became born here, grew up at least till the age of 10 or so, 11 when he left and went east.
Well, certainly an
Just
anomalous encounter and abduction narratives, you cannot avoid them the moment you start listening with an open ear to the folkloric layer of human memory. It is all around the world in every culture.
yes, it is. Why
And
should
that's
it not? Yeah, go
Yeah.
ahead, Nori.
no, it's just that's so important for us to really think about, that I mean, all around the world for eons. I mean, amazing, amazing.
Yeah.
And I did want to ask you one other thing, Paul, and it just flew out of my head. I'm sorry.
Uh-huh.
Sorry.
Next time.
Next time, yes, yes, yes. So good to have you. So, so wonderful to talk with you. Oh, I know, really quick. Um, what do we ask for more disclosure? I mean, this is not,
Yes,
yeah.
that's a great question. I think if we continue to not panic with the information that's being revealed, we will get more information. I think rather than banging angrily on the doors of the Pentagon and saying we're very angry with you for the secrets you've been keeping, or banging on the doors of the aerospace industry, we need to communicate that we are ready to be brought into the conversation. And if the powers don't think we're ready, they're not going to bring us into the conversation. So I just think we have to be that bit more mature and emotionally intelligent about it. I think that's the best hope we can have of greater transparency. Let's keep our media confident. Let's tell our media outlets we want this story pursued. Let's write to our congressmen and women and say, keep this live because we want more transparency. But we need to do it in a way that indicates to the gatekeepers that we are ready to be read in, that there's not going to be panic in the streets, which I don't think there would be. 67% of Americans, according to recent polling, if they were told we were in contact, would say, yes, I'd more or less work that out.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's
Wow.
good to know. But now that could tie in a little to the conversations in the spiritual community where we have to raise our vibration a little, to be, and you use the
Definitely.
words, yeah,
To
yeah,
be more
emotional.
emotionally intelligent is
Yes. And
definitely raising our vibrations so that we're
yeah,
not in fear and anxiety and paranoia. You're absolutely right, Nori. We do have to do that. And we have to be intentional about it from day to day. Am I going to let my mood be determined by how well I slept and what I hear on the news? Or am
yes,
I going to decide what emotional energy I'm going to carry into the day and into all my interactions? I think we need to be far more intentional about that. If we're to avoid being manipulated, if we're to be in a place where we can be more creative and ready for something better.
yeah.
Yeah,
Beautiful. That's perfect.
absolutely.
Oh my goodness, I couldn't think of better words to end on. Paul, thank you so much. Thank you. Please come back again soon and
I will.
just
Yeah.
I always enjoy talking to you both. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for being with us. And well, let's find another time. Knowing you, in about 3 or 4 months, you'll have another book again, so there's more to talk about.
Well, there'll certainly be more to talk about, that's for sure.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And then for those of you watching, until the next show.